know if it will, but we'll try. It could just make it worse. And if if you want to hop onto YouTube, my channel is literally Amanda Gilchrist, and it is live streaming right now. So you should be able to hop on there on YouTube if you can. Well, maybe. Hopefully this kind of works. I don't know if it will, but we'll try. Okay, it could just, I'm going to close off of there so I don't hear myself talking in the past. That could be really weird. All right. Okay, that's okay. We're trying to figure out how to make sure everybody can watch this. So we're going to go ahead and give this a try. We'll actually see if it works or not. So if that doesn't work, I will try other options, but just be aware there's only so much I can do about your Wi-Fi, and I can't record to Zoom. Like it won't, I can, but I don't want to take away that bandwidth from everybody else. Okay, so light enters through the pupil and it basically refracts to the back of the eye, an area called the retina. So your retina is very, very sensitive to light. One of the other things that we find is that when you have something going through, when you're looking at something and you're viewing it through a small hole, this is a property of optics, but we actually know that that image that is reflected on the back of the retina is actually upside down. Now, don't worry, you are not in an upside down world, I promise. In this particular instance, your brain knows that what is being shown on the retina is upside down, and it does actually correct for that so that you can see appropriately. Additionally, your retina doesn't necessarily know what it's seeing. It's just coding for patterns of light. So your retina doesn't know that that's a candle, but your brain will know that that's a candle once it constructs all of this information. So at the very back of the eye, this information is then sent to the optic nerve, and then that goes to the visual cortex in the brain. Now, one of the things that you need to know about the optic nerve is that where the optic nerve leaves the eye, we do not actually have sensory receptors. So you technically have a hole in your vision for each eye. It occupies a slightly different position, so your brain is able to correct for that information. Now, the lens can actually change its shape to help focus an image on the retina. So if an object is far away, the lens doesn't really have to do all that much. But if you have to focus on something that is close by, what you actually see happening is that the lens will fatten up so that you can focus on closer objects. Now, if you wear glasses or contact lenses, so I see at least 3 people and then me here in the classroom that are wearing glasses. So for those here in the classroom with me, are you good? Raise your hand if you have the following. You can see objects close up, but you can't really see far away. Okay. Okay, so we actually have more. Elizabeth, are you wearing contact lenses? Yeah. Okay, so we have almost all of the people in the classroom right now that wear glasses or contacts. You are what we call nearsighted. The proper term is myopia. So what this means is that for whatever reason, your lens, the relationship between the different parts of your eye are shaped in such a way that information does not focus on the retina properly, and we use corrective lenses to help focus it. Now, is anybody on Zoom or anybody in here in the classroom what we call farsighted? You need reading glasses. Okay, so that would be Emily is in this case. So in this case for you, your eyeball's a little bit too long. And so what ends up happening is that you can see far away, but you can't see up close. Now, for those of you who do not wear glasses or contacts, one of the other things that we know is that as you get older, your lens and its ability to change its shape becomes more difficult. The technical term for this, you do not need to write this down, is presbyopia. So your eye has a more difficult time changing its shape to focus. So most people need reading glasses at this point. If you already have glasses, you are probably going to need either bifocals or what we call progressives. And Sophie mentions I have bifocals because I can't see close or far away.
Yeah, I have bifocals.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, I was told I would need them eventually, but it turns out that at my ripe old age of 30 something, I actually have cataracts. Every little light that I look at has a little halo. So the street lights always look like it's Christmas outside. So eventually I will have to get those removed and I will not need these, but I will need reading glasses at some point. So let's talk a little bit about the back of the eye. Let's talk a little bit about the composition of our retina. So the retina, we have two major types of sensory receptors for vision. We have what are called rods, because they look like rods, and we have what are called cones, because they look like cones. And you can actually see that at the very back of the retina, that's where our visual photoreceptors are. Actually, visual photoreceptor is a bit of a redundancy, like ATM machine. I should just call them the photoreceptors. So what's interesting is that we have an area of our centralmost vision. This area is called our fovea. So what I'd like you to do, if you're here in class or if you're on Zoom, if anybody gives you a weird look, blame Dr. Gilchrist, say I made you do it. What I'd like you to kind of do is basically take your hands and just basically kind of focus in on your centralmost vision and try to get rid of as much of the periphery as you can. Congratulations. This is basically your fovea vision. And it might actually be even smaller than that. But what we know is that the fovea is where your vision is its clearest and it's most detailed. And that's largely because most of the fovea is made up of cones. On the other hand, the rods tend to exist more in the periphery. So rods tend to exist in our peripheral vision. Cones tend to be in our foveal vision. Once the photoreceptors realize that there's light hitting them, they will send a message to different bipolar cells, who will then send that message to ganglion cells. Ganglion cells form, axons of the ganglion cells form the optic nerve. And they're the only ones in this entire array that fire action potentials. Leah, did you have a question?
You said the cones were in what division?
The cones tend to be in the fovea. So there are central vision. They work best in bright light. They're good for fine details. And as we're going to see, they also explain how we see color.
So cones and rods are both in the fovea.
Yep. You have, I want to say, about 6 million cones and many, many, many more rods. Now, where the ganglion cells are, as I mentioned, they kind of form the optic nerve. Again, when the optic nerve leaves the eye, there are actually no rods and no cones. All of these are special neurons, by the way. Every single one of these, including your photoreceptors, do not damage them. Neurons do not grow back. So you don't have to do this right now, but your textbook at the very bottom of one of the pages, you can actually figure out where your blind spot is in each eye. So the idea is that if you close one of your eyes and you focus on that dot, you're not going to be able to do it here because it's too big on the screen. But if you try this with your book, if you move far enough away or bring the book close enough to your face, you're going to see that car disappear. Now, the reason that it disappears is because the car is in that blind spot position. And we know it's in the blind spot because the brain basically takes this kind of yellowy color and fills in the missing information for us. So we get the sensation that the car has appeared, or the car has disappeared. Chloe, aren't rods and cones what the whole dress debacle was about? No, the dress that broke the internet was more about ambiguous lighting conditions, and also that every single one of us has our own categorical preference for what we categorize a color as. So it's not so much an issue of sensation, it's actually an issue of perception, where we draw our own personal line between white and blue, for example. It also seems to have something to do with how often you view blue light, AKA your screens, versus how much time you tend to spend in yellow light, like sunlight or incandescent light bulbs or candlelight or things like that. So it's less of a sensation issue and more of a perception issue. Your eyes are not broken if you see the dress as white and gold. Somebody said that very early on. I'm like, I don't think that's correct. And we can talk more about that a little bit later too. So one of the other things that we find is that once information reaches the primary visual cortex, we have what are known as feature detectors. Our brain is starting to look for edges and contours and shapes and movement. So what we find is that once you get to the primary visual cortex in the occipital lobe, you actually find that the brain will respond to cells in the brain will respond to a preferred orientation. So for example, this particular cell in primary visual cortex seems to really prefer a bar of this orientation. Look at how much it fires. On the other hand, as we move further away from its preferred orientation, we fire, the cell actually fires less. By the way, for those of you that are curious, because I'm sharing this on YouTube Live, at some point it will be recorded and you can watch it later. So hopefully this works, fingers crossed. If it doesn't, I'll start getting creative. So the feature detectors that are in our primary visual cortex are really critical. This preference for certain orientations will eventually be able to help us figure out the shape of objects, the angle of objects, the edges of objects, and so on. If you're interested in learning more about these feature detectors, in the spring, I do teach a class in biopsychology. I also teach a class in sensation and perception. We talk a lot about this stuff, probably more than you would want. Like ask a student that's taken my biopsych class about on and off cells and watch them shudder. They have bad memories. So one of the things that's kind of interesting is that different parts of our occipital lobe process different aspects of visual stimuli. So we actually have a part of our visual cortex in the occipital lobe that processes color. We have an area that is very specific for motion. We have an area that is specific for form. We have an area that is specific for processing depth. So all of these separate areas in the occipital lobe process different aspects of a stimulus. Now, if we see this bluebird flying by, we don't see the color separate from the motion. We don't see its motion separate from its form. So for those of you that are here, if I threw, I'm going to pause sharing really quick. If I threw this tea towel that we use for sanitizing, so if I threw this bright green towel, you would not see the towel colorless fly by and then see a blur of green fly after it. You see it as a green flying object. What's interesting is that we don't really know exactly how this happens. We really don't. We don't know why all of these separate areas basically process different aspects of a visual stimulus and how they combine that into a unified sensation. So I talk about this a little bit when I read through the book. This is what we famously refer to as the binding problem. We don't know how this information is bound together. What we do know is that this is processed in parallel. So you are simultaneously, you have different parts of your brain processing color, motion, form, and depth all at the same time. We have a few ideas of how the binding problem works, but no solid answers just yet. So really quick, I want to try something with people who are on Zoom. This is something we can only do with Zoom. So can somebody, I'm going to go ahead and stop share for a second. I'm going to pause share and we can look at this in a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pin my video. So let me see if I can make this bigger. Okay. Is there anybody here on Zoom right now that is zooming in and they have a suite mate in the suite with them? I need your help. Okay, let me see. We got somebody on the chat. Okay, Pandora. So can you unmute yourself for a second? And can you show yourself on the camera? If you're okay with that, let me know.
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. So here's what we're gonna do. Okay, hi Sarah. Okay, so Sarah and Pandora, you're gonna try this because we can't do this here in class. Okay, Sarah, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go find an object, any object you want. I do not want you to show Pandora what it is, but I want you to stand directly behind her with that object. Do not let her see what it is.
Just move. Hold on.
Do not let her see what it is and see if you can get behind her really quick with that object. Okay, thank you. Okay, so Sarah, here's what I want you to do. Sarah, I want you to kind of follow my motion. I want you to take that object and I want you to circle it around Pandora's head until you get right into the center of her eyes. Now, Pandora, before she does this, once you know what the object's color is, tell me what it is, okay?
Okay.
Are you both ready?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
The microwave broken or
Green.
Okay, thank you. Okay, y'all can go ahead and turn the camera off, but Pandora, turn off your mic or keep your mic turned on for a second. I have a question for you.
Yes.
Okay, so here's my question. Did you notice that the object was moving before you noticed what color it was?
I don't think so.
Okay, did you notice that it had to get really close to your face before you noticed the color?
Yeah.
Okay, so you can go ahead and turn the camera off. You can go ahead and mute. Thank you very much. Let's all give her a hand. Thank you. We are clapping for you. All right. So one of the things, that's a demonstration that I love to do in class. It gets everybody to stand up. It gives them the giggles. Unfortunately, in this age of social distancing, that's a little bit hard to do. So thank you for demonstrating. Now, one of the things that we find is that when you do this task, most people report that they see an object moving before they can tell you what color it is. So here's what's really interesting. This is a feature of your visual system. This is not a bug. Part of the reason that you notice an object moving in your periphery before you notice its color is because where the rods and the cones are located in your eyes. So again, your rods are largely in your periphery and they are not color sensitive, but they do detect motion. And they do detect black, white, and gray, and they tend to work best in dim light. If you're ever curious about why your cat has better night vision than you, it's largely because your cat has more rods. So I have a black cat, and occasionally in the dark, I have accidentally stepped on him. And he has the nerve to get annoyed at me as if I knew that he was there. Sorry, cat, I don't have as many rods as you. My night vision doesn't work that way. But cones, which are really critical for color vision, tend to be focused in the center of our retina. They do not really exist in the periphery. They're good for fine detail and for color vision. They don't work very well in twilight conditions or low light conditions. It's part of the reason why when you're in the dark, it's a lot harder to distinguish color. Everything tends to have a bluish appearance. Oops, somebody is typing a question. I have astigmatism. What part of the eye would that be affected? Would that be related to the rods and cones? That's a really good question, Dee. Does anybody here have astigmatism? Raise your hand. So do I. One of the ways that you can actually tell that you might have astigmatism is if you look at your glasses, one might be curved a little bit more than the other. That is not actually a rod or a cone issue. That is a cornea issue. So your cornea, that protective outer layer that I mentioned, is shaped like a sphere for most people. Right. If you have astigmatism, your cornea is shaped like what we call a torus, which is technically a donut, but it also kind of has a bit more of a football shape. That creates, instead of one focal point, a donut or football shaped cornea actually creates multiple focal points, which creates a blur, which is why for a lot of people with astigmatism, when they don't have their lenses on, they see blur. And so that's actually a cornea issue. That's a really good question.
And like when you get lights at night and then you have this spinning.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought that that's how you just naturally.
Nope. Unfortunately not. So one of the things that we know about our cones is that they're really critical for color vision. Now, I am not recommending that you do this because it's not very good for your eyes, but I used to do this a lot as a kid, which might explain why my eyes are so bad. What we have, if you look at white light, if you look at a white part of your computer monitor, if you look closely enough, you might be able to see that white has green, red, and blue components. What we actually know, if you ever mess around with stage lights, is that if you put light through a blue filter and a red filter and a green filter, you actually get white light. So this comes from work from Young, and then later furthered by Hermann von Helmholtz. And this is what's called the trichromatic theory of color. So you have three different types of cones. You have cones that are sensitive to wavelengths of red, long wavelengths. You have cones that are sensitive to medium wavelengths or green. And you have cones that are sensitive to shorter wavelengths, blue or purple is what it corresponds to. With these 3 cones, you have the ability to see every possible color that you can. Now, let's be clear. Your book talks about this more than I do. You can't see everything. You can't see microwaves. You can't see UV light. You can't see infrared, but your cones do enable you to see every possible color in the visible light spectrum. Does anybody need some more time here? Okay. So sometimes we have what is called color anomalous or color deficient vision. Can anybody tell me what this number is? There's a number in there. What is it? 70. Yep. Actually, it's 74, but you're pretty close. It's like,
say 74 because I thought it looked like that.
it's 74. Okay, what about this one?
45.
Okay, congratulations. You do not have red-green color blindness. This is what's known as an Ishihara test. And it's pretty common for people, a common test to look for color deficient vision. So color deficient vision can happen in a variety of different ways. It could be that you're missing a cone, for example. So maybe you only have 2 cones instead of 3. It could be that one of your cones does not make an appropriate amount of pigment. But generally, what we do tend to find is that some people lose the ability to distinguish between red and green. Now, there are other types of color blindness out there, but red-green color blindness is probably the most common. Generally, most people with red-green color blindness are male. And that's largely because, or rather, they have a Y chromosome. And generally, that is because the gene for red-green color blindness is actually carried on the on the X chromosome. If you have a Y chromosome, which does not carry a lot of extra genetic material, if you have the gene for this on an X chromosome, so if you have an XY and you're carrying this on X, you've got nothing else to cancel it out. On the other hand, if you have 2 X chromosomes, this is a recessive trait, which means that odds are pretty good on that other X chromosome, you aren't carrying that gene. So we do tend to see this more in people who are genetically male in that perspective. And this does support the trichromatic theory, but it doesn't explain everything. So oftentimes we will tend to find that generally, if you have color deficient vision, you're not going to be able to make those easy distinctions between red and green. Everything's going to kind of look like a murky brown yellow. But like I said, it doesn't explain everything. So I want you to look at this. This is in your book too. Just look at it for a while. If you've seen that SpongeBob SquarePants episode, look at it. Look at it. I want all of you to look at it. Okay, what do you see? What color are they? Did y'all see a British flag? Did y'all see the British flag? So green switched over to red, black switched to white, and yellow should have switched to blue. Now they're not going to look perfectly like that. So some of you might have perceived the green as being more pink, maybe a little bit. But this is in your book if you want to try it. This is what is referred to as opponent process theory. So what we just did is we created what is called an after image. So I'm going to share something kind of embarrassing because I don't mind. So when I was a kid, one thing that I kind of found really interesting, and it might explain why my eyes are bad, I like to look at lit light bulbs when they were turned on for a little bit and then stare at the wall and see the black after image that was created from looking at a white light bulb. I enjoyed looking at after images. Now I wonder why I'm a psychologist. I think I know. But one of the things that we find is that according to Ewald Herring, we have different retinal processes that enable color vision. So we have red versus green, blue versus yellow, and white versus black. So this may not mean much, but if you look at your crayons, if you have crayons or if you have paint, you cannot have a reddish green. You cannot have a greenish red. You cannot have a bluish yellow or a yellowish blue. It will not work. But after images can be used to create some really interesting stuff. Now, this is not in your book. I'm going to show you something called vanishing fluff. Oh, actually, first I'm going to show you that, but I won't stay on it too long because it might make you dizzy. Yikes. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to stare at this black spot. At some point, the fluff should start to disappear. Try not to blink if you can possibly avoid it.
It's like every time it starts to disappear, my eyes crack.
Right. If you move your eyes, it's gonna change. Did anybody get the vanishing fluff disappearing? Whoa. Welcome to the wonderful power of after images. Do not write this next part down. It is just an explanation for how this works. You do not need to write this down. So, oh, let me see what I got on the chat. I did. Cool. It's a neat little trick. As you're staring at the black dot and your eye is moving, which the Leah rightly noted, your eyes always move, your brain is temporarily storing the image it just looked at. The after image comes in and taken with that stored image cancels out color so that all you see is gray. So the yellow fluff is stored, the blue after image comes in, and the yellow and blue cancel each other out, leaving you with gray. There are some other really cool tricks that you can do with after images. So now we're going to start talking about how we interpret what we see with the time we have left. And after class, I will send you a link to the YouTube live. Hopefully it should work. So if anybody wants to watch this again, or if you want to watch this after class, I will make that available. I will turn off comments. I occasionally get a bot that likes to pop in like 2 seconds after I upload a video, and it's like, awesome content. I'm like, you're a bot, aren't you? Yeah, you are. Okay, so can anybody tell me what they see here? Oh, okay, you see half of a woman's face. Is anybody having trouble seeing the woman's face?
I saw a woman's face, but there's something.
Okay, so is there something else that anybody sees?
And then the man playing
The saxophone? Here's his nose. Wait, here, where's my cursor? Here's his nose. Oh. Yep, you should be able to switch your perception between a man with a really big nose playing a saxophone and then a woman's face. Yep, exactly. And yes, he does have a very big nose. If you're having trouble seeing the woman's face, here's one eye, here's the other eye, here's the bridge of her nose and her lip and her hair. So this is an instance where we are looking at an image where we can constantly reverse our perception back and forth. So we're going to talk about a group of researchers out of Europe that are known as the Gestaltists or the Gestalt psychologists. Now, back in the 1930s, all the way up to the 1960s, here in the United States, we were largely interested in behaviorism. We weren't really talking about mental states at all, but the Gestaltists were. They were especially interested in visual processing. So what do we see here? Do you see a cube? Now, here's my question. Is that cube actually there? The cube is being created by negative space. So the Gestaltists would look at how we organized our visual perception. And what they found is that we often use our expectations and our previous exposures, our top-down processing, to integrate information into things that make sense and are meaningful. So the whole becomes more than the sum of its parts. Like if we were just looking at the sum of its parts of this figure, we'd be seeing a lot of random blue shapes all separated from each other. But we see something bigger. We see something greater. And so the Gestaltists basically termed this a gestalt. This is our tendency to integrate pieces of information like these into a meaningful whole. So one of the first things that we have to do if we want to perceive an object is separate it from its background. And so this is what the Gestaltists referred to as figure-ground segregation. So we basically organize our visual field into objects that stand out from the background. Now we're really good at this. We're really good at figuring out where objects are and where the background is. So oftentimes we've looked at research that does what's called a reversible figure in ground. So can anybody tell me what they see here? People holding hands, maybe walking down some stairs. And then what else do you see? Arrows. So you can't see those both at the same time. Your perception is constantly shifting between the two. What's interesting is that when we're looking at the people going downstairs, it's black against a white background. The background is formless and it doesn't have clear boundaries. When we switch to looking at the arrows against a black background, now it is the blackness that has no form or boundaries. So we're constantly shifting our perception between the two. And this can make for some really interesting artwork, such as this. How about one more slide and we call it a day? So once we have separated an object from its background, the next thing that we are going to do is group objects together. And so this is what the Gestaltists referred to, obviously, as grouping. And there were different ways that you could group objects together. So this is when we have a perceptual tendency to organize stimuli into separate groups. And again, the perceived whole will be different from the sum of its parts. So the next time that I join you on Wednesday, we will talk about some of those different grouping principles. Also, for those of you who were on the Discord on Friday, I'm sorry I sent you the creepy image of the girl from The Ring. It was just a movie. You are going to be okay. All right, everybody. So I will make sure that YouTube Live is recorded and available for you. For those who weren't able to access the Zoom meeting in full, I will see you all next time. Have a great day. Take care.